Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Own Your Voice pod. Today we're going to be talking about why avoiding tough conversations will hurt you and how to have those tough conversations. So if my voice sounds a little bit funky, it's because I'm having a little bit of a stuffed nose. So I hope that I don't sound too bad, but I promise you that today's episode is going to be of so much value and it's going to help you so much when you have to have those tough, challenging conversations with your boss, with your parents, with your friends, with your partner, etc. Okay? So, question to you first is, have you ever avoided a conversation you needed to have with someone? You know it has to happen, but you're afraid of ruffling feathers, of like making it a big deal, of spoiling the relationship, and so you decide to just avoid it and hold it off as long as possible. How did it feel? I'm pretty sure it wasn't a good feeling, right? And there's so many different types of tough conversations we have to have throughout our entire life. Think about at work. Maybe a colleague just doesn't give their best effort as you give your best effort. Or your boss who doesn't seem to respect your after work hours. Or your parents who don't seem to understand your point of view no matter how hard you try to explain. Or your friend who constantly rants and whines about her life and you always feel drained by her conversations. You don't know what to do or how to approach the conversation. That's exactly what we're diving into today. I want to first talk a little bit about why avoiding tough conversations will hurt you. Number one, you're basically letting go of your values and silently adopting theirs. Number two, you're allowing yourself to downplay your needs and your boundaries and instead accepting theirs. And number three, I find this one probably the most harmful, when you allow your fear of tough conversations to stop you from saying what you need to say, you're giving power to that fear and creating evidence in your mind that you can't handle tough conversations, and your fear remains a fear because you've always avoided it. So right now, I'm sure you're asking like, okay Ray, I know I have to have these tough conversations, I know it's gonna hurt me, but how do I have them? Every relationship and every conversation is unique, and it's quite hard to like create some sort of framework. In fact, I think it's almost impossible to create some sort of perfect framework. Because every conversation has a different context and everybody is unique and everybody has a different upbringing. So whatever that I'm going to share today, the 6 steps on how to have a tough conversation are highly principle based and they're likely to be applicable to any tough conversation, but I would suggest for you to also experiment and use critical thinking as you apply these steps, and also apply according to what feels comfortable to you and what you feel will work for the situation you're in. Okay, so let's dive right in. How do you handle a tough conversation? How do you approach it? Step 1, seek to understand. Before approaching any tough conversation, it's important to have this mindset, seek to understand. It means A, you understand what your values are, and B, you understand what their values are. Values here are your highest priorities, not necessarily moral values. So I'm talking about what is the highest priorities in your life at the current moment. Why is this important? The reason why tough conversations are tough is because there's a lack of understanding. For example, your colleague doesn't give their best at work and you start thinking, why are they so irresponsible? You start developing resentment and annoyance and the relationship sours further. And you never understand why they don't pull their full weight. You're just wondering why. Why does someone do that? I mean, have you ever felt this way? Someone says something or does something and you're thinking, why would they do that? That's so dumb, right? And you just don't understand why. You're always left wondering. Or for example, your parents keep giving you advice that you don't agree with and you're feeling so trapped. They're constantly nagging at you. Once again, you don't understand why they keep giving you advice that doesn't make sense to you, and you end up concluding that they just don't understand. And it's true, they don't understand you because you haven't communicated with them, and you don't understand their perspective because you haven't communicated with them to seek their understanding. In all of these cases, there's a lack of understanding between both sides. You don't understand why they're acting this way, and I'm sure they don't understand why you're acting this way either, because as much as you think you know your parents, as much as your parents think they know you, they don't know 100% of you, and you don't know 100% of them. In fact, I don't think we even know 100% of ourselves. So that's why communication is so important, and seeking to understand their values as well as understanding your own values is so important in order for that conversation to go smoothly. A good conversation occurs when both parties are aware of each other's values and respecting them. Before I share how to seek to understand your own values and other people's values, let me just share a story. I used to get really frustrated with my parents for nagging at me to just study. They'll keep telling me, just study, don't do all this freelancing, this entrepreneurial stuff. You can do it when you graduate. Right now, just focus on your studies, right? We're already paying for your education. I don't understand why you have to go out and work. And I felt like they didn't understand me, and they were just trying to tell me what to do. And so there were so many times that I would hide from my parents why I'm staying out late at night. I'll probably be having coffee with a mentor or doing some business stuff, or maybe emceeing an event, but I would just avoid sharing with them because I don't want them to say, okay, have you studied for this? Okay, have you done your homework? All that kind of stuff. Like, to me, I was just so sick and tired of hearing all of that, and I felt like they didn't understand me. But after having multiple tough conversations with my parents to understand their point of view, I realized that they love me and they also value stability and security, whereas I value purpose, my passion, and my fulfillment at work. They've also grown in an era where getting a job was actually the safest option and what made the most sense at that point in time. Nobody really freelanced. There wasn't really an internet era where, you can just run a digital business. So to them, getting a good job is just the most practical thing to do. When I decided to stop ignoring and avoiding the tough conversation and instead look through the lens of curiosity and understanding, when I seek to understand, I understood my parents' words and actions. At the core of it, we're more similar than we think. All of us want to avoid pain and we desire pleasure. It's just that our definitions of each are different. And that is why today the relationship between my parents and I are is so good, because I'm constantly understanding what their point of view is and what they value, and they also seek to understand what I value, and it's just much easier to communicate when I understand their values and they understand mine. So how do you seek to understand what your values are and what the other party's values are? A, seeking to understand your values, aka what's the highest priority to you. This is important, okay, because sometimes you get frustrated at people and you get annoyed at people, and the reason why you're frustrated and annoyed is because they are acting not in accordance to your values. They are doing something that you don't understand, because to you it's your highest value but to them it's not. So to you it just doesn't make sense why you're doing this. So that's why it's important to actually understand what your values are, also understand their values, and you see there's a difference. It makes a lot more sense. Oh, this is why I'm annoyed at them, this is why they're not doing it this way, my way. It's because we have different values. And when you seek to understand, then it takes away all this ambiguity and it's easier to have a conversation. So A, understanding what your values are. Some questions you may ask yourself to understand what your highest values are what dominates your thoughts? What do you most often talk to others about? What inspires and energizes you? It could be things that you watch or things that you read. What goals stand out in your life and have stood the test of time? Are there certain goals in your life that you have made a long time ago and they are still things that you want? And lastly, what do you love to learn, to read, to research about? What do you find yourself gravitating towards, like the books you gravitate towards, the videos you gravitate towards, and you actually consume them because you want to and not because you have to? These are actually some questions from the full 13 value determination questions designed by Dr. John DeMartini, and he's someone that I'll describe as a polymath who shares wisdom he has synthesized from 1,000 years of knowledge and experience from philosophers and other great minds. And he is someone that I've been following for many years. I did these 13 value determination questions many years ago, and it really helped me understand what I value so that I live according to my own values instead of other people's values or society's values. So that is how you understand what your values are. Spend some time to marinate over it. Ask yourself, why do I value this thing? Okay, why do I think about this thing so much? Why do I talk about this thing so much? Okay, so you can actually find the 13 questions online when you Google it, or you can actually just get this book on Amazon or Book Depository, or maybe drop me a DM. I'll send you the PDF version, and it's also in there in chapter 2. So that's understanding your values. Next, you want to understand what other people's values are. It's probably not as easy to just give them the 13 questions to do, and it'll be really weird to do that to someone you don't know. So there are actually some ways you can observe what other people value. Okay, so what you can do is you can observe their behavior. What triggers them? What excites them? What are the decisions that they make? What are their choice of words? Or what you can do is to have genuine conversations with them. Ask them questions to get them to know them better. Knowing what they spend time on and what they talk about, you'll be able to understand what their highest values are. So let me share with you a story. I used to work with a colleague who wouldn't be able to have meetings too close to the evening because she wants to spend time with her kids. And I feel really bad to say this, but I used to internally roll my eyes because I thought it's just a short meeting. Why not just get it over and done with? Why not just settle it today? Why do we have to find a time tomorrow? It's just a short call in the evening. After spending more time with her, having lunch with her, and just having many deeper conversations with her, I've come to see her deep love for her kids, and how she just really loves and treasures the kids. I think her kids is probably one of her highest priorities before anything else. She's also an entrepreneur on top of being a mom, and simply by observing her decisions, I'm able to know what her highest values are. Because when it boils down to having to choose between taking up a job overseas, just a short job for a couple of days overseas, and having to leave the country for a couple of days, versus staying put with her children, and being there for them just in case they fall sick, etc. She chooses her children anytime. And this showed me that one of her highest values are her children and her family. Now I know we just have different value systems, and I'm not a mom, so I don't have children, and at my stage of life, my highest value is my career. It's my vision, my mission in life. So that is why, to me, it doesn't make sense that she doesn't want to have a meeting in the evening, but to her, it makes the most sense. So by understanding that, I'm able to have a deeper relationship with her, and also a better working relationship as well. So to wrap up step 1, which by the way is the longest step, because I feel like step 1, seeking to understand, is the foundation to every good relationship. Understanding yourself and understanding others. Understanding your values and understanding other people's values. So that when you have a conversation with them, you will reserve judgment. You'll not think oh, why did they do this? Why did they do that? Instead, you seek to understand why, and realize that there is a reason why they do or say certain things. It's because they're living and speaking according to what they value. Once again, step 1, seek to understand what your values are and understand what their values are. That way, you'll be able to have more connected conversations as opposed to hitting walls and being in disagreement. Step 2, bring up the tough conversation authentically. Being authentic can look like this. Step 2, bring up the tough conversation authentically. Being authentic can look like this. Hey Alex, there's been something I've wanted to talk to you for about a while now, and honestly, it's a bit hard for me to find the words to, but I really treasure our working relationship, and hence I've decided to bring this up. When you have about 30 minutes this week for us to talk, it's okay to say that it's hard for you to bring it up, and it's okay to be real and be genuine. Understand by bringing up the tough conversation, it actually saves the relationship. By avoiding the tough conversation, we build resentment over time, and the other party will ultimately be grateful for you bringing up this tough conversation. Okay, so that is step 2, bring up the tough conversation authentically. You can say that it was hard for you to do this, but you really treasure the relationship. This is why you want to do it. So give the reason as to, why you're bringing up at this point in time. It doesn't have to be very formal. It can just be authentic and be real. Step 2, share how you feel. Okay, so there is a couple of guidelines in this area. Okay, sometimes people think, okay, I'm gonna share what I feel. Okay, and then they start saying, hey, you made me feel very unheard when you talk over me instead of listening to what I have to say, right? Next time, can you not do that? And when you say things like that, when you say you make me feel unheard, you did this to me, then it might make the person feel immediately attacked, and they'll be very defensive, saying, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. And then it just ends up being an argument. So when I mean share how you feel, it's important to reserve judgment and labeling. Do not label you make me do this, you did this. Okay, so there's a difference between A, saying, you made me feel unheard when you talk over me instead of listening to what I have to say, versus B, I've been feeling unheard recently. I feel like it's hard to share my thoughts during our conversations. You see, right now you're not saying you made me feel unheard. You're saying I've been feeling unheard. You're just sharing how you feel, right? How you feel. You're not saying you make me feel this way. You're saying I feel this way. Okay? So when you do that, then it prompts the person to, ask, why do you feel this way? Is this something that I've done, And it becomes a two-way conversation instead of like a one-way blaming session. Okay? So the next thing you want to do is to avoid questioning why, right? We're still under step 3, share how you feel. Avoid questioning why. Avoid saying, why do you do this? Because that triggers the person into defensive mode. Instead, you want to say, I noticed that you have I noticed that you have done XXXXX. Help me understand, why did you decide to do XXXXX? Okay, so when you ask, I've noticed, then you're sharing a fact. You have noticed. And when you ask, help me understand why, you're actually inviting the person to share their perspective and their point of view, and to share why they've made that decision. So once again, it goes back to understanding what the person thinks and how they think and why they do certain things, instead of like labeling and asking them directly, why did you do this, which could make them feel attacked. So the intention you have might be the same, but sometimes the choice of words that you choose can result in the message truly landing the right way, or the message being warped into an intention that you didn't even have in the first place. Okay, so once again, avoid questioning why. Avoid saying, why do you do this? Instead say, I've noticed that you have done this. Help me understand, why did you decide to do this? Okay, so this invites the person to share more about their perspective. And what you want to do is also to mention specific recent events that can be used to bring up that point, so that there's a point of reference, and it'll help them recall those specific incidents for them to know how they need to improve over time. So that is step 3, share how you feel. Okay, reserve judgment and labels, avoid questioning why, and mention specific recent incidents so there's a point of reference. Next, step 4, ask for their perspective and acknowledge it. Okay, this is pretty straightforward. Basically, you just want to ask them how they feel and what they think about what you have just shared. Ask for their point of view. Right? How do you feel about what I've just said? As simple as that. Okay, and once they've shared what is on their mind, then acknowledge their perspective. You may not have to agree with their perspective, but you acknowledge it, right? You can say something like, thank you for sharing that with me. I know it might not be easy, but I really appreciate you for doing so. That is step 4, ask for their perspective and acknowledge it. Step 5, find middle ground and make a commitment. There needs to be a conclusion and a commitment made at the end of the tough conversation. Otherwise, it's just going to be a wasted session. So you can say something like, can we make a commitment to each other that we will automatically update each other on our progress 3 days before the project deadline, so that we'll never have a situation where we don't finish our work in time? Is that something you're agreeable with? And then let them reply. When they have made a commitment and they say, yes, I commit to that, then it is easy to remind them of their commitment 1 month from now when they forgot about it, right? So it's much easier to bring them back to the month where you have made a commitment and say, hey, remember we made this commitment? I would really appreciate for you to honor it. Okay? So if let's say they disagree to this commitment, right? Then what do? Very simple. Ask them to suggest something. Okay, you can reply with, what would you suggest instead? And then let them suggest and see if that's something you're okay with until you find a middle ground. The good thing about asking them to suggest a solution is that people are more likely to adhere to what they have suggested because they suggested it. So if they suggested it, they're more likely to actually honor it. So it's always good to ask them, what do you suggest we do? Or what do you suggest we commit to? Okay, so that is step 5, find middle ground and make a commitment. And step 6, the final step, thank them and reassure them of your intention. Thank them. Say, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. It may not be the easiest one to have, and I really appreciate you for, taking out this time to have this conversation. And then reassure them of your intention, saying something like, I felt this conversation was necessary to preserve our working relationship, and if there's anything I can support you with in future, please let me know. Okay, so this is what I mean by step 6, thank them and reassure them of your intention. And so that is the 6 steps to, dealing with these tough conversations and approaching them in a way that will lead to an amicable end. And to just summarize these 6 steps, step 1, seek to understand them. Seek to understand what your values are and seek to understand what their values are. Step 2 is to bring up the tough conversation authentically. Step 3 is to share how you feel. A, reserve judgment and labels. B, avoid questioning why and instead say, I've noticed that could you kindly explain why, or could you share with me why, help me understand why do you do this. And C, mention specific recent events so that there's a point of reference. Step 4 is to ask for their perspective and acknowledge it. Step 5, find a middle ground and make a commitment. And step 6, thank them and reassure them of your intention. Tough conversations, once again, aren't easy, but they're very important to have because your values, your boundaries, and your feelings matter. You may be avoiding that conversation because you don't want to sour that relationship. You don't want to make it awkward. But avoiding it will only create resentment and destroy the relationship over time. Not just that, you'll find yourself being even more disconnected with your voice, and you might end up losing trust with your voice the longer you hold back. And with that, we'll come to the end of today's episode. My nose is still really, really stuffy. I hope the audio isn't too terrible. If there's any time you ever need to have a tough conversation, come back to this podcast episode and do share this with a friend who struggles with having tough conversations as well, because this may be exactly what they needed. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Own Your Voice pod. Bye!